Welcome to Management 2020. In this video, we'll talk about another way to achieve sentence variety, and that's through compound and complex sentences. So we'll look at compound sentences and complex sentences, and we'll also look at an example of a compound complex sentence. So compound sentences are generated through the process of coordination. Coordination means to connect items of equal grammatical rank. And in the case of this video, we're going to talk about that equal grammatical rank being independent sentences. So sentences that can both function on their own independently, but combining them. And the way we combine them is using a comma and then a coordinating conjunction. So coordinating conjunctions are a special category of grammatical words in English. One way to remember what the words are within this category is to think of the acronym FANBOYS, FANBOYS, because there's only 7 coordinating conjunctions in English. Now, even though there are 7, in reality, probably only about 4 are commonly used in contemporary English. It's not that the other ones can't be used, they're just quite rare. So and, but, or, and so are the most commonly used coordinating conjunctions. And the way that we can form compound sentences is by beginning the sentence with an independent clause, okay, a regular sentence, putting a comma at the end of that sentence, using the coordinating conjunction, and then having our second sentence. Now, technically, we could put a period between them, have independent clause and a period, and then begin a second sentence with a coordinating conjunction and have the rest of the sentence. That's very rare to do that, but grammatically, we would permit it. You could start a sentence with and but and or so, but most commonly and most acceptably, we put those coordinating conjunctions between sentences using a comma to separate the first sentence from the second one. So let's look at some examples here. We can hire a new manager, comma, or the company can merge us with the sales department. Okay. So it's 2 separate sentences. They could function independently. They both have a subject and a predicate, but we can combine them together by putting a comma between them and then a coordinating conjunction. As we've learned, we can't just put a comma between them. That's called a comma splice. It's a type of run-on sentence. It's considered ungrammatical. But the comma plus the coordinating conjunction, it's like this magic formula. We can do that in English because of that coordinating conjunction. Our second example, the shipping team reached their goal, so their supervisor approved a bonus for them. And the next example, the data looks promising, but I think we need to study it for another 6 months. And the last example, she heads the accounting team, and her sister is the lead programmer. Okay. So in each of these, we're helping show relationships between ideas. Are we showing choice? Are we showing consequence? Are we showing contrast? Or are we showing things that are in addition to one another? And so compound sentences allow us to show those relationships by choosing an appropriate coordinating conjunction that will reveal that relationship. We just want to make sure we punctuate it properly by putting a comma after the first independent clause before that coordinating conjunction. Now, another way to create sentence variety is to use subordination. So subordination involves the idea of something being higher and something being lower. And in this case, what we mean by higher and lower is an independent clause that could function as its own sentence, and then something called a dependent clause that cannot function as its own sentence, and it has to be connected to an independent clause. So subordination or independent clauses are created through the use of subordinating conjunctions, or sometimes they're called subordinating adverbs. Here's some common ones. If, because, after, while, when. There are lots. It's hard to get a full list here on one slide. English uses lots of phrases or words to initiate a dependent clause. And usually what happens is we have an independent clause that could function of its own sentence, and then we put this subordinating conjunction or subordinating adverb at the beginning of the sentence, and now it's not a complete idea. It needs another sentence to be combined with it in order to complete that idea. And so in terms of punctuation, we could have an independent clause be the first part of the sentence and then followed immediately by the dependent clause. And what helps the reader or the listener know that we're shifting from the first part of the sentence to the second part of the sentence is the appearance of that subordinating conjunction or subordinating adverb in the middle of the sentence. The word like, if, because, after, while, when, beside, those kinds of words. Okay. But if we put the dependent clause first, then there isn't that signal word in the middle of the sentence to show the reader that we're shifting from one part of the sentence to the other. So then, if that's the case, we'll put a comma between the two in the middle of the sentence. And that sort of guides the reader to, okay, I'm shifting now from the dependent clause to the independent clause. So either put the dependent clause second in the sentence so that its signal word signals the shift, or if the dependent clause comes first, then you've got to have a comma in the middle so that that signals to the reader that you've got the shift from dependent to independent. Let's look at some examples that should help clarify this. So if you like, pause the video for a second and see if you can identify the subordinating conjunction, or sometimes called subordinating adverb in the sentence, and then which part of the sentence is the independent clause because it's fronted by that subordinating conjunction, and which part of the sentence is the independent clause that could function as its own sentence. So in the first one, please let me know, could be a sentence on its own. But there is this other dependent clause, if you want to meet next week, that has to be attached to it. And because the word if is in the middle of the sentence between the independent clause and it starts the dependent clause, that signals to the reader that we're making the switch between those two clauses. In the second sentence, sales have increased since we launched the new ad campaign. Sales have increased could be its own sentence, but since we launched the new ad campaign can't. It's not a complete thought. It's going to feel awkward. If it didn't have the word since at the beginning, it was just we launched the new ad campaign. That would be fine. It functions as an independent clause, but once since is put at the beginning of it, now it's becoming dependent and it has to be connected to another independent clause. In our third example, when the client approves the draft is our dependent clause, okay? Because there's our subordinating conjunction at the beginning of the sentence, when. So when we finish that first clause, we have to put a comma to signal to the reader, now you're shifting to the second clause. And then we see the same thing with the next sentence, because our supply has increased their prices. We have to end that with a comma so that the reader knows now we're shifting to the second clause because the word because was at the beginning of the sentence. And so it's not in the middle to help signal that shift. Now, in addition to having both compound sentences and complex sentences, it's possible to create compound complex sentences, which are sentences that would have two independent clauses with one dependent clause. So if you like, pause the video and see if you can identify those three parts. Where is the dependent clause? Where is one of the independent clauses? Where is the coordinating conjunction? And where is the second independent clause? So with our first example, we start with the dependent clause, when we won the case. And then we have the first independent clause, the CEO sent out an email and, coordinating conjunction, everyone was relieved. In the next example, we start with a dependent clause. The intern was nervous. And then we have our dependent clause. We know we're making the shift because we see that subordinating conjunction there. It's signaling we're moving to a new clause because it was her first presentation in front of the whole team. And then we've got a signal now that we're moving to another independent clause with the comma and with our coordinating conjunction, but she performed very well. With our last example, again, we're starting with the dependent clause, although the client usually prefers new devices. And then we have June offered a used machine, comma, so my manager was surprised. Okay. As we do things like this, the cognitive load of sentences increases. The language is more complex, the ideas are more complex, the audience has to do more mental energy to understand the concepts. Sometimes it's necessary because we need to relate complex ideas. So we need complex and compound sentences. But we want to be careful that we're trying to be as clear and concise as possible while still conveying these complex ideas. And sometimes the best way to do that is to break the sentence into parts. But sometimes it's important in order to convey those relationships that we might need to use these more greater variety of sentence structures. So in the video, we talked about compound complex sentences and even compound complex sentences and how to form them using correct punctuation and the grammatical terms that can be used to make these connections.